This is Ray Dion from WBZ Radio at the Quincy Lumber Company, site of the old Southern Tide Mill in the city of Quincy on the Town River. I'm here with Jay, the author of an article that was published a month ago in the Ledger entitled An Old Timer Tells About the Town River Tide Mill. Jay, our listeners would like to know something about the old days of the tide mill industry, which no longer exists in Quincy. You were there as a young lad, so would you share some of your first-hand experiences with us?
Of course, Ray. What would you like to know?
How did you actually get to go inside the Tide Mill, Jay? And what was it like?
Well, Tom Larkin was the miller and my uncle was the owner. So I was one of the few boys allowed inside the door. Inside, you could feel and hear a rumble of stones in the jarring of the mill. But it was a clean, sweet place. There was the smell of a nice meal, and there was a fine dust that covered the inside of the building. However, the floor and the stairs were smooth and polished like a dance floor. Gosh, it all comes back to the years.
Great description, Jay. I can just picture it. Tell me, what was it like outside? Any activities for you boys?
Oh, the fishing. Well, the gates of the old Quincy Canal still swung open on the flood side. It was always a good place to fish for smelts and sculpins. And it was easy to fall from, too. Many boys fell from the plank, but luckily nothing worse happened than a wet jacket.
Thank goodness for that.
But that's not all. It was really great fun to go in under the mill and when it was running and go swimming in the mill race on a hot summer's day. We'd even get into the stream as it came down from the wheel and drift down. And we'd be covered in like the foam created by the water.
Where did you change to your bathing suits?
We never had bathing suits. What we basically did was we just put our clothes on a rock and floated and splashed around to our heart's content. But it was great.
No swimsuits? Well, let's move on to my next question. What do you remember about any of the people who worked in that business, Jay?
Oh, Nat Prouty, definitely. Oh, Nat was a carter. He would drive his horse and team and cart to the mill. He'd even get one of them bags of grains on his back and then pitch him over his head into his cart. Now his hair and his beard and his clothes would all be covered with that stuff. Nat certainly advertised his goods. You know, I had one of them rides on the wagon, Ray. Nat was quite a character. Speaking of Nat, do you remember that book 2 years ago, Before the Mess, by Richard Henry Dana?
I sure do.
Well, Nat was a shipmate with Dana on that trip coming back from the Cape Horn on the Alert. Nat was known as Lil Nat. He wasn't much over 5 feet tall, but he made up in width what he lacked in height. I remember that Nat could pitch a 100-pound bag of meal into his cart as easy as he could throw a brick.
Sounds like quite the fellow. Did you know any other carters?
Sure, after Nat, it was Tom Pearlson. But later on, Quincy Bent drove the team, and then Loud & Co. put a small mill at their store. And after that, they stopped using the old mill altogether.
I see. Going back to the work at the Tide Mill, can you tell us more about getting those bags of grain ready?
Well, let's see now. On the second floor, there were bins that were full of corn, and then there were 2 sets of millstones. Each set at the top had like a vertical shaft, right? And at the bottom of the shaft, there was this horizontal wheel. A fume was directed against the wheel. The fume directed the water from a gate in the bottom of the dam. And the mill was built over this. But eventually the tide had fallen enough so that the wheel could operate again.
What happened after the tide had fallen?
Tom Larkin would turn on the crank that raised the gate. Then the wheels began to turn, and then the gate was opened wider, and the stones spun faster and faster. And a stream of the mill came down into a trough. In the trough, an endless screw pushed it into a chain of buckets overhead. A bag was placed under a spout, a side was lifted, and 100 pounds of meal ran into that bag. Now it was ready for its journey to the store.
I see. And who ran that grain and feed store?
It was Loud & Co. who had the flour and feed store. It was near the railroad station, and this was on the site of Mr. Keaton's building, which had burned down.
Oh, I see. And going back earlier, how did the grain originally arrive at the Tide Mill?
Yeah, so some of the corn was brought by sconers. Let's see. I can remember one of them lying at the mill full of the hatches. And the corn was being hoisted up at a window in the gable, right? And there were probably other cargoes, but most of it came by rail. It was carted to the milling down here. Then it was taken to the store by the team drivers at Nat.
I see, Jay. Now, for our listeners who aren't too familiar with the tide mill, could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the pond gave the power that was filled twice a day by the tide. It was an arm of Town River between the upland at Pond Street and the Salt Meadow at the west. And about 3/4 of a mile above the dam, the town broke, emptied its waters into Quincy Canal. And the old lock was still used in 1858, and its gates swung open on the floor tide and closed at the turn. This would impound the water, and it gave an 8-foot head at the wheel. Then, after the tide had enabled for 4 hours, the mill could run. So with both wheels running 4 hours, the pond would be lowered, and it would be filled again next tide.
Quite a process, Jay. Now, please tell us what eventually happened to the mill.
Well, after it stopped running as a grist mill, it passed into the hands of Mr. Larkin. He used the mill in connection with the lumber larf. Then it was owned by B.F. Johnson, and he was followed by its owner, now, the Quincy Lumber Company.
Thanks so much, Jay. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, it's nice to, think back on these old days and remember my boys, the old playmates. But most of them have unfortunately passed away now.
Happy and sad memories, Jay. We appreciate this, and now you're giving us some first-person history of the Southern Tide Mill. Thank you so much, Jay.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Thank you.